welcome to the NPS Listen, Learn, and Lead series, a series of interviews with some of the great leaders of our campus who are making the learning experience here so special, both as an education and research mission. We have here today Dr. Nita Shattuck, the director of the Crew Endurance Team out of our OR department and out of GSWAS. Dr. Shattuck, thank you very much for being with this interview, and thank you for your dedication. You and I met each other. Actually, your work touched me when I was the commander at Great Lakes.
That's right.
And you did some marvelous work for us in the whole sleep study area for the recruits coming through boot camp. So it's a pleasure to now be able to be working alongside you here at NPS. Before getting into some descriptions of your great work, tell me a little bit about you and what got you here.
So I am so fortunate to have this position. I think often, if you didn't even pay me, I would love to do this job. I love this work. So I started out in my graduate work. I would go over to the library, and I was supposed to be looking at child development and cognitive performance in kids, and I would come back with all these articles on military members, Navy divers, cognitive performance in cold water and things like that. So I would come back with things that were really, my professor would come in and look at the things I was reading, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "This is fascinating." So I was really captured by that. And I think probably one of the reasons I had this real interest in the military is my dad was a Navy chief. Actually, he enlisted in the Navy in 1941. He was a corpsman, Navy corpsman, and his first assignment was Pearl Harbor and Hawaii. And he was at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed, and then continued through the Navy through the next 63 months he was deployed. So that's a long deployment.
Wow.
So hearing these stories from my dad, I think kind of really influenced me. I really had this heart for the sailors and the lives that they live, sailors and Marines, because of that background. And then I've just been so fortunate to have been able to do research both for the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, and then again now here at NPS, where we have all these students, amazing students that I'm able to teach.
Well, you know, it's interesting because you had a personal contact with the Navy and the military, and then this kind of intellectual contact as you went from one thing to another and then discovered your passion and now such great effect. I must say is that it always has struck me as very impressive. Everybody who's been a leader in the military, particularly the Navy and the Marine Corps, know the name Nita Shattuck. So it's great to be able to have this interview with you today. Tell me about the lab. This is you've got some cool stuff. And so let me give us a sense of what you have here in this lab and then what are in the other labs also.
Okay. So what we focus on is human performance. I mean, that's really what I have studied my entire career. So what are the things, the determinants of human performance? So here behind me, I have a ship bridge simulator. It's a Kongsberg model, and it's used by a lot of Navy bases have Kongsberg simulators to have people practice driving the ship. We've got the Coronado Bay Bridge up right now, so we're in San Diego. But what we try to do is we have devices here in the lab, but we try to have most of our research is actually done in the field. But then we bring things back into the lab and then test things out. So for example, in this device, what we ended up doing is we were looking at how do we stress people, how do we improve their ability to perform in the face of high stress. So the way that we stressed the participants in this study is we stuck their foot in a bucket of ice water.
I remember that. That.
Yep. And so we had this all set up, and we had our ice. We'd go over and get buckets of ice over at Herman Hall and bring it back, and watch as they're performing, because the body doesn't differentiate between kinds of stress. Whether somebody pulls out a gun, points it at you, or your foot's in a bucket of ice water, your body responds the same way. So what we've been doing is teaching people, how do I respond, because everybody's got a little difference in the way they respond. How do I respond, and how can I continue, how can I work through that and continue performing in the face of stress?
So we'll talk about some other parts of your lab, but can you tell us a story as to how that kind of research and work then would relate to some things that you learned and have discovered within the Navy?
So I think about two fairly recent tragedies in the Navy, the McCain and Fitzgerald, and both of those tragedies happened early in the wee hours of the morning. One was at 1:30 in the morning, one was at 5:20, I think, in the morning. So when you think about that, so people have been working through the night, they're very tired. Of course, this very stressful thing happens with this collision. So when they did after action looking at what happened, there were some individuals that were so stressed they actually couldn't continue performing. They froze. And so this research and the work that we're doing actually helps people prepare so that when they are in a stressful situation, and that's what we're really trying to do, is to prepare people, because we know that it's not always going to be smooth sailing in the Navy. So how do we prepare people so that we can continue performing regardless of the circumstances?
So now in another lab here, you have a wet lab. Why don't you talk about that a bit?
So in the wet lab, we actually collect, so one of the ways you can measure stress, we can hook up various sensors, like you think about a lie detector test. We can look at the sweating that you have, and your heart rate, and your pupillary dilation, your EEG. But back there in the wet lab, we can actually look at biomarkers. So we can collect, so when you're under stress, we can actually see that appear in your saliva. So we can collect saliva samples, and we can determine how long you've been stressed. We can look at all these different biomarkers of stress. So we look at alpha amylase and cortisol in particular. Alpha amylase peaks very quickly after an event. Cortisol more like 20 minutes or so after when it peaks. And then we can look at a chronic stressor called C-reactive protein. So with those three biomarkers, we can kind of look at the time course. Have you been under stress for a long period of time? Or, was it just very recently? Or did what happened, did it even cause any stress response at all? So we're actually doing this study out at SWAS, now Surface Warfare Officer School in Newport, and they really have upped the game for the PCOs, PXOs. They send them through the fire trainer and the Buttercup, the Buttercup where the sinking ship and you have to plug the hose.
I do. I did that as an officer candy up in Newport. I remember it well.
And the swim. So they have these three very stressful events, and then they also have another stressful event where they have people pulled out of class, and now you're going to be monitored while you have to go through a very difficult decision-making process. So
the other interesting work you're doing about indicators on stress is the Aura Ring. Can you talk about that a little bit, and
Sure.
and how that relates to sleep and stress?
Absolutely. So here is an Aura Ring. I don't own stock in the company, but I think it's a very useful tool. It's something we've just been studying recently. We've just gotten them into the lab in the past few weeks. The Aura Ring collects heart rate. So one of the things that happens when you're under stress, heart rate will accelerate, getting ready to do things. It also looks at respiration rate. It looks at heart rate variability, and it collects data on your temperature and also on your sleep. It's a very unusual, we've done lots of sleep research For the past 20 years, we've been studying the sleep patterns of sailors and other members of the military. But this device is the first wearable that I know that does a really nice job of looking at your sleep stages. So I can wear one of these, I can see how much REM sleep I got, rapid eye movement, I can see how much deep sleep I got, how much light sleep. So it actually does sleep staging, which is a really neat aspect of it. We're going to be using it in a study. Major Josh Boyle is doing a thesis with me, and he's going to be looking at resilience and training people to manage stress better. And we're going to be looking at that over a 2-month period, and we're going to be tracking their performance longitudinally over that time by wearing Aura rings. So we'll be collecting their data.
Yeah, so it was interesting when you and I talked with Major Boyle, just because we were doing some work on getting the project approved. And it was interesting. He was a Special Operations Forces officer who's looking at the Aura ring as a means to understand not only stress at the moment, but its impact upon resilience, and even thinking about how that will affect some knowledge about suicide. Isn't that true?
That's right. That's right. So one of the challenges when we don't get enough sleep, of course, if you get me started on sleep, who knows what's going to happen next? I'll talk your arm off. But so with sleep, when we think about sleep, part of the things that happen while we're sleeping is we dream and we work out things that are going on that we've seen, things that are upset about. It's a wonderful healing, psychological healing that occurs, not only physical healing, but psychological healing. And we see with people who do not get good sleep, that is one of the predictors of depression. And when we look at suicide and people who've attempted suicide, often it's associated with poor sleep and insufficient sleep. So that's one of the things we're really, really interested in.
So there'll be many, many students who would love to be able to say that they have a bed in their classroom, but one of your labs has beds in it. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
It does. So we have a Navy rack. So having spent many, many nights on Navy ships in my career, and my team, we've had our chance to experience what Navy rack sleep is like. But we can't, often we don't have a ship right now that's very close by for us to collect data on. So we were briefing Admiral Brown, Vice Admiral Brown, and here in the lab, and he was looking at all the work we're doing particularly for surface forces, and he said, "This is awesome. Tell me, is there anything that I could do to help you?" And I said, "Yes, sir. We need a rack here in the lab." So we can actually simulate. I mean, when people sleep in their home, with these beautiful mattresses and all this stuff, it's not the same as sleeping in a Navy rack. So that's what we have. We actually can simulate that and test things out here in the lab, then take them to the ship, then come back. So we have that capability. So that's kind of that.
So I remember meeting with a number of your students and how excited, particularly the surface warfare officers were, as well as the submarine officers, about the rack, about the impact upon different kinds of thickness of curtains,
right,
and on the light within a room. And I remember again you're talking about the light at Great Lakes, but there were these sleep aids almost, and one looked like the aid that Geordi had in Star Trek. That you put this on and you have the ability to sleep better. Can you talk just very, very briefly about the impact upon lighting on sleep?
So high energy visible light, or blue light. All of us know with our smartphones, smart devices, that blue light suppresses your melatonin. It makes it hard to go to sleep, which is why we always say, don't take your don't take your smartphone to bed with you. So light is this wonderful time setter. It tells you what time of day it is. And as humans, we like to see light in the morning, and then the light changes the quality of the light, the spectrum changes over the course of the day, and at night we have much less blue light. So what we are able to do, what we've been doing is helping sailors that are having to do night shifts, do night work. You give them these light emitters,
Right.
and it actually gives them light at night, but it tricks their body, their circadian rhythm.
Right.
It can help entrain their circadian rhythm and help them get set up correctly.
Well, I know we have just so much to talk about, but prior to ending this interview, can you tell us one or two more stories that really were very gratifying to you, that brought your work home to you?
So, one of my favorite ships, I know you're not supposed to have favorites, right? In the Navy, you can't have a favorite
Of course
ship.
you can have your favorite ships. Of course you can.
One of my favorite ships.
Everybody in the Navy who's been on a ship has a favorite ship, so it's good.
So, two ships that I would say, the Nimitz, the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, we studied that ship for about 18 months, the reactor department. And that's where we were able to actually do an experiment and find out that if sailors worked circadian rhythms, if they were the circadian-based watch bills, we could actually improve their reaction time and reduce their errors. So it was just like, oh my gosh, and they loved it. So the crew loved it. So that was a really an amazing situation. And out of that, I actually was able to brief, at the time, he was a 4-star admiral, John Richardson, who became our chief of naval operations. When I briefed him about it, he said, well, if the aviators can do it, why can't the rest of the Navy do it? And I said, well, sir, there's absolutely no reason. You're right. So he said, will you help me set up guiding principles? And that's something we were able to do, which is really having an effect across the Navy. And behind you, I want to point out, this was a gift from one of my favorite ships, the USS Chaffee. And I was riding DDG-90. I was riding the ship. Our team boarded the ship in Mexico and rode the ship down to Valparaiso, Chile, collecting data. And it was just this amazing, amazing opportunity. I'd never been to the Southern Hemisphere before riding the ship. But then a couple of months, and so we're collecting data, found some great results. At the time, we were looking at 4 ships, 2 on circadian-based watch bills and 2 on the other watch bills, typical 5 and dime kind of watch bill. And our ships, the ones on the circadian-based watch bills, did much better. A couple months later, when I got back, I got this big box, and I'm thinking, what is this? And it was this, the crew had gone together and had gotten me this ship's quilt, I guess, blanket.
You know, one of the things that marks you, Dr. Shattuck, is that when you touch others, they are touched indeed. When your work is so authentic, your care and your passion are so real and so genuine. Sailors feel that, and Marines and soldiers and airmen. And that's part of your magic here as one of our most favorite professors, is your passion for our people who are at sea and in the air and out there in the operational environment. You've had an impact upon them, and I'm grateful that you're part of the team here and you're teaching and you're making the fleet and the field and the force better. And it's been a genuine pleasure and an honor to be able to interview you today. And we can certainly go into the website for NPS and look up the Crew Endurance Team, can't we?
Absolutely, yes.
So I would invite all of those who have been listening to this interview to do that. There's some great work that Dr. Shattuck and her team and her students have done in remarkable ways to discover how people can be healthier, more resilient, and actually better in every way as sailors, Marines, airmen, and soldiers. Thank you very, very much for this wonderful interview. Thank you, Dr. Shattuck.
You're welcome.